This is Dean Sanjeev Kagrum from the Thunderbird School of Global Management at the Arizona State Knowledge Enterprise. We want to welcome you. Hope you are safe and healthy. We're going to get started in just a second. Give everybody a few more seconds to join. Please do add your name, affiliation to Thunderbird or ASU if you're alum, year, location, other information in the chat function. We're really excited about this incredible globinar this morning, and we'll get started in about 30 seconds. Let's get started then. Again, I'm Dean Sanjeev Kagrum from the Thunderbird School of Global Management at Arizona State University. I want to welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's a complicated and complex time in the world today for sure. We at the Thunderbird School and ASU have been really focused on three fundamental principles to help and support and ensure that all of our students, faculty, staff, community members, alums, anyone we can support anywhere from the locally to internationally is healthy and safe. And when I say healthy, I of course mean physically healthy, but also mentally, emotionally, spiritually healthy. The second is to provide as deep and powerful and rich educational experiences for everyone that we can connect with, from our undergraduates to our executives, and especially for our alums and partners around the world who are making sense of this dynamically evolving world that we're living in. The third, of course, is to provide thought leadership. And today is a perfect example of that with our incredible faculty at the school across Arizona State and our partner faculty and experts around the world. We're going to go right to the great program here. I'll introduce our panelists in just a second. I just want to provide some discussion tips as for those of you who are on your computers, your laptops, you see this. If you're on your PDA, perhaps not, or a phone. We can control muting and unmuting of mics. If you have trouble unmuting, please raise your hand or type in the chat and we can assist. Open up the chat window and we'd like to type a message, as I've been saying, to the panelists or one another. Tell us where you're from, where you are, and your affiliation, if any, particularly your alumni year, your graduation year, if you're alum of Thunderbird or ASU or a faculty or staff member. Prospective students, welcome to you as well. Please open up your question and answer window if you have one. That's where we're going to take question and answers. Right now, we're not going to take raised hands. We're going to go straight to the discussion. But later in the discussion, we can welcome. But the ideal way for you to ask your questions is in the Q&A box, okay? We could go to the next slide, Sylvia. So it's my pleasure and honor to welcome one of our most distinguished professors, Rich Edmondson, professor and Kikauer Fellow of Global Marketing and Brand Strategy, a multiple winner of Thunderbird's Most Valuable and Effective Professor Award. He spans multiple B2B and B2C industries, including high-tech, telecom, financial service, consumer, and many others. Published more than 100 articles and many in the most sought-after leading practitioner journals like Sloan Management Review and HBR and many others. He served as UN Senior Technical Advisor for Marketing in China and has been a visiting professor at universities in China, Spain, Russia, Poland, and Hungary. Welcome, Rich. It's great to have you, and thank you. We'll go to Patrick, was awarded the Thunderbird's Most Valuable and Effective Professor Award in 2019 and many other times. In fact, served as a fellow in Accenture's Institute for Strategic Change Institute for High Performance. He's pioneered methods of measuring shopper attitudes toward wireless and mobile commerce well before it was the vogue. And his research contributions and assessment tools are featured in multiple business books. And he's really been leading as one of our great leaders in the fourth IR transformation that we've undertaken at the school over the last 2 years. So welcome, Patrick. It's great to have you. So we're going to go straight to a series of questions that I'm going to ask Rich and Patrick, and then please do start to have your questions in the chat function. In the Q&A functions, and share comments in the chat. Okay. And if you've just joined, welcome. We're delighted to have you. So first to you, Rich and Patrick, it seems from the results of your recent research published in Sloan Management Review that a core marketing principle, customer and brand loyalty, is under siege as a result of COVID-19. Can you tell us more? I mean, many ways, as I've written and many others have written, in many other trends in other areas, what we've seen is accelerations of what was already underway. It sounds like here, perhaps there's something completely different. So would love to hear and for you to share with our incredible participants here from all over the world. I see dozens and dozens of countries represented. The sort of the key sort of conclusions of this great recent research. Rich?
Yeah, thanks for that, Sanjeev. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the T-Birds and other friends and colleagues around the world. Yeah, there's been an acceleration for sure in a range of areas, but I think from a marketing and a customer behavior perspective, there's been a severe disruption. And in some ways, Patrick and I and our research team, we have other colleagues on this project, have viewed this as a grand social experiment, because never before have we tried to shut down a global economy and then try to reopen it within a pandemic. So what we're really looking at here is changes taking place at a very macro level, where there's some fundamental external shifts happening, but there's also changes taking place within the customer where their world has been disrupted and they're used to habits and patterns of behavior that it would allow them to shop in a typical way that is no longer the case. It's not business as usual. So when we say that the term brand loyalty or customer loyalty is kind of under siege, it's that customers have been forced in some ways to shop in new stores. They're forced to consider new brands, go down aisles they've never gone down before, shopping aisles, and to be vigilant in ways that they've never been vigilant before. So in some sense, all the patterns and behavior of customers doing, if you might call, just habit or shopping without even thinking, they are now forced to almost reconsider the entire shopping experience as a new experience and doing it for the first time. And what that does is it takes the idea of customer loyalty and sort of lays it bare and allows new brands to be seen in lights they hadn't been seen before, where they can gain exposure, mind share, and perhaps even trial from customers for the first time. And we have some interesting data that we can share with you, and we will share with you along those lines. Patrick, anything else you want to add in there?
Patrick.
Well, thank you, Rich. Thank you, Dean Cogram. Welcome, everyone. Appreciate everyone, Thunderbird team and otherwise, just to give us the opportunity to share this interesting perspective that we've been exploring the last really few months now. As Richard has been sharing here, I think we'd all agree that COVID-19 was not something anyone would wish on the business world or us in general as a population, but it has given us this opportunity, a unique opportunity to sort of revisit long-hold truths that we thought were so ingrained and really challenged assumptions that we had. Rich has touched on, and I think we all know as consumers, our lives are different than they were prior to the pandemic. And the other side, of course, as marketers have had to revisit the kinds of strategies and tactics that they had held true for so long. And it is exactly as Rich has mentioned, this idea that we see predominantly evidence of people incorporating new brands into their lives in ways that we were previously very, very difficult, really strategically trying to either entice customers to try new brands. Because of this external influence, we had a unique opportunity to sort of study this in real time and try to understand from a marketing perspective what new approaches were necessary. What we're finding is that there's a great opportunity here for those who are agile enough to adopt some new innovative and creative approaches to take actually advantage of this opportunity. And I think that we'll hit on some of that as we get into some of the data and evidence today. But these really are radical shifts that are changing the way that we would have approached marketing in the past. And in other words, are we actually seeing some new habits being formed? I don't think that it's hyperbole to suggest that in some cases, we're actually seeing some significant shifts. And what you're seeing from a marketing perspective, practitioner's perspective, is this a new normal that will take hold? And while it may not be across the board, we might find that in some cases it is true. Many ways the terrorist attacks or other kinds of financial crises have changed how we've interacted with the world, and this might be another one of those.
So let me continue with you, Patrick, and then go back to Rich. Patrick, could you share some of that data with our participants? And then Rich, I want to come to you, and I want you to kind of share some of the most powerful examples, cases, to bring some of that data to life. So Patrick, could you start with some of the, some of the big data points or sort of trends, patterns you found as you were doing the study and the research?
So thanks again to the entire research team that we have. So it's in addition to Rich and myself, and of course in support with Thunderbird. But we really had a unique opportunity 2 weeks after the stay-at-home orders were imposed in the US to get into the field for a national survey to actually look at buying patterns. And taking advantage of this at the very first wave, a representative sample of the US, we found and asked customers about sort of their buying patterns, what they were experiencing, particularly for the kinds of products that we really use every day. And many of us experienced that firsthand, that things that were available in a typical sense in the stores we went to had changed or were not available. So we were interested in that. What we had found was prevailing evidence that really since mid-March when those orders went in place, about 85% of those sampled had confirmed that they actually had gone to a new store, a store that they hadn't normally visited in the past. And of those, 54% were actually buying new brands. So these are some of the top line evidence that there was actually some new adoption of buying patterns. Now, as we know, maybe that's because the brand was not available, but what we found was only about 1/3 of our sample reported that they were switching because the brands were not available. So something else was going on. There were other kind of motivating factors at work. And we can get into some of the cognitive theory around why we think that might be happening. But what we actually found was that it's not all explained by the fact that brands were not available. Something else was sensitized or something else was going on in typical buying patterns here to see people were actually adopting that. And they were actually seeing new ways to actually pay attention to maybe things that are being recommended by others or things that they even wanted to try that they thought maybe wasn't so important in the past that now were very important to them. Another big finding, along with very familiar to us, a shift to fourth IR, is that we are actually seeing, and many have confirmed, that it was a shift to online buying for the first time. So we saw that it was also a way that they were buying in new ways, not just physical stores. And the times that they were shopping were very different. These are very important patterns when you're a marketer thinking about a different strategy to approach, attracting or retaining your customers, because, the channel that they're on and the time that they're doing things very much are a part of the programmatic advertising and promotion strategies that are in play. So this, again, was pretty monumental kind of evidence of a shift that we were seeing that. So those are some of the top line things, and there are some others that I hope that we get into. There is a second wave that we followed up, and I'll pause there so we're not overwhelmed with some data. But the top line is we were seeing people buying new things, and not just because they were out of stock, but for some new reasons. And I hope as the discussion continues, we'll highlight some of the other things that we found as we continued with the research that's yet unpublished but underway.
So Rich, we want to complement what Patrick was sharing in terms of the quantitative findings, but also share some of the qualitative cases that could bring this to life. I mean, you and I have gone back and forth. Like, Amazon is the world. Isn't this just Amazon taking over the world? Is that just not what we're seeing here?
Well, certainly the shift to online would benefit Amazon, but there's been many other traditional retailers that have now dialed up their online functions, from Target to Walmart. In fact, there's a lot of evidence that Amazon has not gotten the same degree of boost that a Target, a Walmart, or even grocery brands that have online shopping services or online pickup services that Amazon has not benefited in the same way that these other more traditional retailers have benefited. So in some sense, I think there's going to be a shift to online. The question is, what will it come back to when it comes to baseline? In other words, it's been a large boost. They claim about 30% of purchases now will be via online or e-commerce, which is about double where it is now. We believe it'll shift back to some midpoint between those two, but there will be an opportunity for the best marketers to determine how to create value and deliver value when the new normal returns, whatever that might be, or the rebound evolves.
Do you have some examples of brands or that are losers and brands that are winners that you might be able to share with the participants? Or it seems like?
Well, I would say the brands that I think have been disrupted some are the major mega brands. Those that have the title here is about brand loyalty being disrupted, and it's an opportunity for smaller brands. We believe that this grand experiment, as I called it up front, has created an opportunity that no realistic organization, no practical organization would ever want to run, meaning let's get out of stocks conditions in our core brands and see what customers do. So for me, brand loyalty is always tested by the following question. What would you do if your preferred brand were not available? Well, there's no responsible marketer that is ever going to intentionally remove their brands from the store shelves and try to test that. But that is the ultimate litmus test. And in some sense, this social experiment that's been foisted upon us has indeed allowed us to examine that. And if you consider the data that Patrick talked about, and if I were a major mega brand and I heard that 54% or more than half of respondents tried a brand that was new to them, and in subsequent follow-up data, we find that 76% of those or so have repurchased that new brand again because they find they're satisfied with it. They find that it's superior to the brand that they had preferred previously. This is really, I think, a chance for consumers to try new things. And I think it's also a chance for marketers to try new things in a sense of creating value in ways they've never done it before. And I can talk about some of those examples, but I think I'd like to just focus here now, and we'll get to that shortly, on what's changed about customer behavior and what's changed how they spend. Because in a sense, that's really what marketers are keen to understand.
Yeah, so let's talk about that, Rich. Go ahead and jump into that. I mean, it's really about the shock to the system, that language that you and Patrick used with your research team in the article. What is the shock to the system? And build on what you were just, intimating.
Well, I call a shock to the system for me is putting behavior into context. And I think there's two levels to that context. One is the macro environment and everyone out there understands that it's not business as usual when we're trying to do our everyday shopping, our routine shopping. Nothing is routine any longer. So that's what forced customers to shop in new places. In other words, we see them, going to new stores they've never shopped in before and navigating aisles. And I like to look at my own personal behavior. I can go to my favorite store and pick up 20 items in 3 minutes. And then I go to a store I'm unfamiliar with, and it takes me 20 minutes to pick up 3 items. And I mean, it's because we're just not familiar where things are at. So we're vigilant, and we do indeed then start to develop new habits. And when we find the brands we used to prefer are okay, they're acceptable, they're good, but there might be some competing alternatives out there, this is the opportunity for new brands to create value, create exposure, and try to capture some of the market share that was just not available to them previously under normal circumstances. Patrick, anything to add there?
And we're going to go over to you, Patrick. And we've already got some great questions that build on this particular theme that I'm going to share with you. And Patrick, anything you want to add before I ask some of these questions from our great participants who I imagine are former students, certainly of yours, Rich, and potentially of Patrick's. So Patrick, anything you want to add before I ask the questions?
I'll just contextualize a bit on, I think, what Rich was sharing. And I think we're going to get to a question that'll allow us to talk a little bit about the mechanisms or the theory maybe on why. But I think what we're describing here, what we observed from our sample, was that people were confirming that they were in new routines. And when you think about the way that major brands compete, oftentimes because of just mere familiarity, you take a brand of disinfectant, for example, that's very popular. It might be something that you choose just out of routine. And I think what Rich is highlighting, because of so much change, there may have been a sensitization of other kinds of features. So for example, maybe a store brand just really promoting that it was very effective against cleaning. That actually seemed to maybe drive more buying behavior, even though, prior to the pandemic, that same message was there, but it wasn't as important. People were sensitized to certain things. This is just a hypothesis, a theory that we're still exploring with the data, but it sort of confirms that, and this is definitely the seeds by which you're seeing potentially new habits being formed. When you think about traditional marketing and all of the spend to do that, this is an unprecedented opportunity maybe for any brand, but particularly for small and medium-sized brands that wouldn't have the budget to ever promote their product in those ways. We're actually seeing some benefits maybe for some buying patterns for those products for the first time.
So I have a couple of questions, Rich and Pat. Go ahead and jump in, Rich. It sounds like you wanted to add something. Go ahead, and then I'll ask these two questions. It's on the data.
Well, in the beginning of March or middle of March, when we began this research, and this is an ongoing set of program of research for us, where we're actually fielding our third study wave as we speak, to collect additional data on some additional things we're looking at, customers' emotions and what patterns are persisting, et cetera. We were surprised that this very first wave carried out 2 weeks into the pandemic, that many customers, of course, as Patrick said, are going to be buying in categories that are seen as pandemic related, emergency related, like cleaning products, but they were also purchasing in new ways products that they had not been forced to purchase because of the pandemic. And it wasn't a forced purchase either, because their favorite brand was out of stock. We found evidence that a large proportion of consumers just wanted to try new things because they had broken out of their routine. So it was, I was willing to try a new brand. I wanted to try something new and different. And that's the kiss of death, or the sort of red flag that goes up for a super mega brand, that you don't want customers trying new things and finding out that there are acceptable substitutes out there that may not be the largest brands or who you think your main competitors are. So we saw that as an opportunity for the smaller and medium-sized brands. Customers are just doing things different, and they're kind of primed to consider new patterns of behavior. So
their customer seems like they're in a massive experimentation mode, one might say, right? So we have these two great questions from alums. One from Calvin Burns, 14. Curious if customers that tried a new brand went to a light brand, budget brand, or premium brand, given market conditions. Any data, anything in the data that showed that, Patrick or Rich? Do they, is there any evidence on some patterns there, light brand, premium brand, budget brand in their choices? It might be a great question to add to future surveys, because I think it's a great question. And then the other one from Jonathan Knowles is, Patrick and Rich said that 54% of people have bought brands that are new to them, and that these brands represent 30% of their basket. Should we conclude that around 15% of shopping volume is therefore up for grabs? Is that a legitimate, sort of at least tentative conclusion? Or would you
I believe, if we put the data together, I think that's a hypothesis that could be tested. As I like to look at the data, if I were a brand manager in a particular industry, let's say consumer or a food and beverage, I'd want to know what proportion of the spend in that basket is new purchases, and that they're willing to purchase again. So while we have aggregate data that 54% have purchased new brands and about 30% of their total basket, it would be ideal for any marketer out there to understand how much share they're losing to this new experimentation, as you put, Sanjeev, by customers. And what that does is, from our point of view, it gives customers an opportunity to see that there are lots of acceptable substitutes out there that they would have never tried before, prior to the pandemic because they were just in those types of routines, I guess you can say. With the first question with regard to Calvin, hi Calvin, I had him in class some years back. And I will change your grade if I might question. We haven't seen evidence of, let's say, shifting to a budget brand necessarily. I think it's at present because marketers weren't responding. It was whatever was available. So if it was a premium brand and I wanted it, I believe customers would have purchased it. As things are settling down now, this is a great opportunity for the store brands at consumer packaged good level to promote their own brands, store brands, or private labels. And if those are a little less expensive and from a value perspective and quality perspective, quite good, we may find that customers may be spending less overall and getting the same level of value they did prior to the pandemic.
Well, let's get to some of the theory, because data is wonderful, but without good theory to help put it in context and frame it and interpret it, you know, we can come up to lots of things. And what's great about your article, as always, Rich and Patrick, is you have some great sort of theoretical constructs that you're working with. So I'm intrigued by the use of the term cognitive misers in your article. Is this the same as or similar to judgmental heuristics of Kahneman and Tversky? You know, tell us a little bit about this notion of cognitive misers, either Rich or Patrick, jump on.
Well, I'll jump in just to start and tip our hats to Taylor and Fisk that actually came up with the term cognitive miser, talking about this, but clearly Kahneman and Tversky's work around general heuristics has brought new light to that and expanded our thinking. You know, basically, as you know, we are shopping in our routines, many of us can attest that the kinds of purchases that we're making are things that we're familiar with, that we're used to. The cognitive miser idea is that it's basically an efficiency that, you know, we don't want to put deep thought into every single decision that we need to make. It takes some kind of special influence, perhaps, for us to sort of consider or attend in specific ways to maybe features or benefits of those products in new ways. And this is what we were alluding to, I think, earlier in the research. In the article, I think we give simple examples, such as I had shared before. Perhaps a store brand, obviously, you're not going to be so familiar and maybe impressed with the store's brand by brand name, but they are touting that they're 99% effective or what have you. And this is just a simple example of what perhaps is going on, that there was a shift in this sort of use of a heuristic, especially during this time where people are sensitized. Whether that's going to persist is sort of work that we're continuing to look at. But again, the seed is then planted that perhaps then we understand, and our research is supporting through the second wave, as Rich already mentioned, people reported rebuying those brands and also reported a high level of satisfaction with those new brands. Some of those new brands were probably you know, a discount or a generic or a store brand or something that they were less familiar. So this is really the idea that maybe the cognitive miser heuristic here was flexed, and it was because of some of these external influences or because they were more sensitized, someone even maybe recommending to them that, hey, I bought this and it's working just as well. This is a gold mine now, especially for those brands that can pivot and take advantage of that. And you know, the research was focused on consumer packaged goods, but I think we, at least for me, I think we can see some of that evidence happening in other ways. When we talk about maybe some of these brands flexing in their fourth IR sort of context, we'll see that might be true there as well. So it's a general concept that there's some heuristics that we're working that maybe now people are open to revisit. And it was maybe out of their consciousness, but suddenly it's showing up in their behavior.
Yeah, and if I can add in there, you know, there's a bit of what we might call psychological inertia. We like to put the least amount of effort in if it's a routine and consequences of that routine that are satisfactory. And I think shopping behavior is exactly in that mode. We find products that if we're dissatisfied with, we will not purchase them again, but we eventually get to a level where we have a range of purchases that become habit, and we don't have to rethink them, as Patrick said, each and every time. And that link, that routine, has been broken by, as I called it up front, this grand social experiment where an economy was shut down and now is restarted, and we have to, continue to live our lives and purchase food, products. And the grocery store for us is the great experiment to be testing this in. But as Patrick said, I think the implications here can go beyond simply consumer packaged goods, and that with so much disruption, we believe customers are vigilant for more new and different things than they had been prior to the changes taking place in March.
So we have a question from Sid that builds on this, Rich and Patrick, which is, if now consumers are experimenting, testing, learning, trying, how do we know that this data is really, that it's not epiphenomenal? That in fact, once things go back to, there's never going to be a completely same normal, but a new normal, they go back to those habits, those typical things that marketers and companies know, and they'll just go back to a new set of habits. It may be different, but it's going to be the same sort of underlying patterns, just different brands. How do we how do we know it's not an epiphenomenon? This is just a moment in time, and we go back to the normal in a little while.
And that's a great question. And that's exactly the question we're assessing in our third wave. We do have data from a second wave. So if we put the larger research program into context, we collected data at the end of March, we've collected data at the end of April, and we're currently, as we speak, collecting data with a series of similar questions and an expanded set of questions. And the one in the second and third wave directly related to Sid's question about, was this just a diversion and you're going to settle back to your normal routines, or has the experience of trying new brands, trying new products, new offerings, and engaging in new behavior, is that going to create a new normal for customers that are that used to be in habit mode? The data is being collected, and I guess we could say stay tuned, and we'll have a second seminar perhaps in a couple of months that will, I'm not sure, answer that question directly, because I'd say consumer behavior is always evolving. But in this case, it's been severely disrupted, and we'll see what returns to normal and what becomes the new normal. Stay tuned on that, Sid. Good question.
So to you, Rich and Patrick, any further breakdowns in the data across demographics? We've talked a lot, Rich, about Gen Y, Gen Z, millennials and the rest, genders, income levels. One could imagine, just as common sense, a lot of folks out of work, concerned about their, budget envelope. And so that is affecting any even just early senses of any demographic breakdown in the data, any predictors that way? Either Patrick or Rich?
Well, I'll start just a little bit. We actually did suspect that maybe these buying patterns, for example, buying new products or being open to try new things, might be related to some kind of economic factors or earnings factors across demographics. And the data actually didn't support that very strongly. We actually found that this buying pattern was pronounced across a wide range of incomes, for example. Similarly, by different demographic segments, while we haven't explored all of them, there wasn't a pronounced effect that this was being driven by any one particular typical kind of a demographic that we would build a segment on. And that actually made it more fascinating. The other topic that you hit on a bit was more on the kind of the psychological or the mood and experience. What we have found, and we are not the only ones, it's a bit counterintuitive. While people will admit that this has been a very stressful time, their mood is actually fairly positive. It's actually been skewing toward the happy side of things for a variety of reasons, which obviously goes beyond our research to fully explain. But we have known for a long time as marketers and as people that we can hold great dissonance in our minds. We can be affected by something that's negative, but actually have mood and attitudes that are otherwise. So we're still exploring this, but we're actually finding some really interesting patterns that perhaps maybe some demographics patterns that we yet haven't hit on, and perhaps actually the overall sense of positivity that we're actually seeing in people's, maybe it might be hope for a future, or maybe some of these things are making their lives better, that it's actually been a boost to their overall mood and sentiment in some ways that we still need to explore and understand more.
So Patrick, you've intimated, as Rich, about Industry 4.0, fourth IR. So jump into that. What were some of the findings, the sort of the lessons, the emerging experience around the drivers, the fourth IR drivers, or aspects, implications of your research?
Well, I think we were already down the road that most businesses that were shifting toward fourth industrial revolution, broad set of concepts, probably really more about our own human existence. But from a marketing perspective, it often boils down to using data and analytics in new ways, being able to apply AI in new ways to understand customers. And what we had, many companies that were already down the road were able to really pivot very quickly. We highlight in the article, for example, I believe it's a Dutch supermarket, that were able to detect in data and use dynamic pricing to actually help promote the retention of certain products that were perhaps being bought in a hoarding fashion, people that were maybe buying too much, and dynamically price in order to ensure that those products would be available maybe for more shoppers, which you can imagine, chain-wise, that's probably makes them more liked by overall customers. We see that in other examples where companies are now using that data to sort of shift their offerings. Very recently, at least in the US, Uber Eats has offered now a family meal portion, which is another huge shift. Again, fourth IR, ordering things online to be delivered at home is a shift in itself. But now you actually have them paying attention to the data, because the model was set up much more for maybe singles or small individual meal delivery, now actually catering to families. We highlight in the article, I think it was Panera Bread is another company that started to offer basics like food and produce. And this is all being driven by data. It's being driven by the analytics that we can better understand customer buying patterns. So companies that are really attuned to that and then have the agility, of course, to shift are the ones that have actually been able to benefit somewhat from this. And we think that that's really across the board. It doesn't necessarily have to be the very big, blue chip, big brands that are doing this. But we have other examples of really small, medium-sized businesses, local businesses that are shifting and finding new ways to solve that last mile problem through data. And this is one example of flexing the fourth IR and being able to take advantage of it.
That's great.
And if I could add in one other comment, I believe there's no doubt that online has been turbocharged. I sort of mentioned it earlier by the pandemic. So I think if I were in any industry that had an online component, this would be dialed up in a big way, because I think customers are a bit more primed to doing things they hadn't done previously. And we have some data we're starting to analyze to look at what did you do prior to the pandemic. We purchased it in store, and now we see some evidence where they're more likely or even more willing to purchase those same items online. And when that convenience factor comes in, this could end up being a bit more permanent behavior, but it's still unfolding, and we are assessing it in our subsequent waves beyond the first one mentioned in the article.
So in fact, right on this, Rich, Dina Devion says that millennials and Gen Z are sharing on social media that your order has been shipped, in quotations, is one of the most satisfying messages to receive during the pandemic. As a father of a 20-year-old and a 15-year-old, I can appreciate that and perhaps bemoan that a little too much as well. Any data on how consumers get emotional satisfaction from online buying that could be greater or different from in-store buying? Anything coming out from the research that you and Patrick and team are doing, or that you're seeing out there emerging?
Well, I can jump in here that actually prior to this, our same research team shared an article that was in February, I believe, in Sloan Management Review, that really focused on how online retailers could really improve this kind of emotional experience, and hit on exactly the points that you're making, Sanjeev, that really a lot of these marketplaces that we refer to as stores today that might be very commonplace are really built for distribution. So yes, I know we're all happy when we know that the order is on its way. But if you really think about it, they've been built by a culture of web engineers to make that a very efficient sort of ecosystem to identify a product and effectively a logistics system to have it delivered. Our question, even back in February before the pandemic, was what could that experience be if it was really enhanced for the new kinds of ways that people are shopping? And I don't think it's limited to just millennials. And we're talking about really incorporating, again, new fourth IR solutions, things such as maybe augmented reality or virtual reality to actually have a shopping experience that builds on the kinds of cognitive, social, and experiential patterns that we really value in the in-store experience today. And it's our view as a research team that we could be doing much more and should be doing much more. And I think actually the pandemic will accelerate many vendors doing much more along the lines of exploring how those technologies can not just be a whiz-bang kind of Star Trek experience that is fictitious, but something that's actually very real and commonplace. And obviously we can talk about a number of examples if it's relevant, but the top line is that I think we're already down that path. And now it'll be very interesting to watch how brands and stores adopt that kind of mindset, as now the opportunity has never been more poignant for them to jump on that, because if we continue down this path for a while, social distancing, maybe shifting online to shopping, you have an audience that's very ripe to adopt these new technologies and solutions.
Yep. If I can also add in the title of that article, we thought was pretty clever in the sense of, is your brand lost in the Amazon? And meaning you're just one of so many offerings that Amazon will list and drop down, et cetera, which is so different from the in-store experience, and certainly the way that a manager would want to participate in the marketplace, or a company would want to manage its brands. Amazon has no interest except to generate sales. It doesn't have a vested interest per se in creating an online experience for each individual brand. So I think what Patrick's saying, and I think we can take some of that back to a large degree and take ownership, and using fourth IR and a range of technological advances to create a better experience for the customer. Sanjeev, you also asked the question, and it will go from a macro factor to a micro factor. We're starting to do some segmentation now in our data, which is looking at why people like to shop. And some folks are functional. They will just want to get the job done. Others have an experiential component. They want to touch and feel, which isn't good news from an online perspective, meaning they enjoy that aspect. And then there's the social aspect of shopping. So we're beginning to see in our second and our third wave of data some really interesting clusters of customers that have different needs. And I think from a fourth IR perspective, or just a brand management and marketing strategy perspective, as more people go online, there's still going to be segments of customers that are going to want that external experience that is out of the house, and not just ordering things and your order's been shipped. That's nice, but how about when you meet someone in an aisle that you're familiar with and you can say hello, and at social distancing, of course, and engage them, because that's part of a social experience as well, and it's part of the shopping experience.
Well, I want to, that you brought social distancing. David Young, our great alum based in London, asked a question about, as did Jonathan, about as the economy reopens and what happens. So I'm going to ask you that question in a second, Rich and Patrick. But it seems to me that it really is this very interesting push and pull that's happening. The push of consumers to start, because of the pandemic, to explore different ways and types of brands and products and services. And then the pull really is, can now a series of companies that perhaps in the past were relatively crowded out, seize the opportunity of, whether it's fourth IR or whatever it might be, to pull them into a different way of being customers. And that's going to be, this is the grand experiment, as you said. It really, really is. Go ahead.
From a marketing perspective, and anyone who has taken core marketing courses or even advanced marketing courses we like to talk about the 4 Ps. And a point we make in this article is that each of those dimensions is so darn important: product, price, promotion, and place. And I can just see my students rolling their eyes.
I'm rolling
we've
my
heard
eyes.
all of that. Yeah. But what we've done, and we make the point here in this article, is that we think we can repurpose each of those Ps to better appeal to the desires, needs, and even fears to of the new consumer, if you will, that's currently trying to figure out what to do next and what will remain. So let me explain just a bit further. We like to think about product now, not so much in the traditional sense, but in an evolved sense. What's a solution we're offering to customers? So it's not, don't think about your product offering, think about it as a solution from the customer's point of view. And I'm going to give a neat example I just came across yesterday that encompasses a range of these. We then go to distribution or place, and we like to put it into the context of access. How do we allow our customers now to access us in new ways that keep social distancing in mind, or maybe online is going to be the way we make happen? So we have now product to solution, and place to access. Then we go to price, and we like to think of price now as being more about value, meaning what am I getting out of the deal, not just what you're charging me for, because I think we'd be willing to pay for a premium to feel safer, et cetera. And that's why online sales are getting boosted. And then finally, instead of just promotion, we educate the customer why this is good for them, how they're benefiting, or even how we're contributing to the greater good society-wise. So yesterday I came across a very interesting article about the island of Cyprus is now offering, please come visit, because the tourism industry has been hammered. Please come visit Cyprus. And if you end up getting sick, pandemic-wise, COVID-19, as you're visiting here, we will pay for your entire holiday. We will pay for your medical care. It's like this, I don't know the economics of this from a tourism offer perspective, but my gosh, it's taking into a line of focusing on the solution now. You're gaining access to my product because you will come here. And from a value perspective, you don't have to worry about healthcare costs if you think going to Cyprus is a reasonably safe example. Patrick, you have any other examples you want to pop in there? Because we're seeing companies doing really innovative things. And I'll mention one more, but I'll pass it on to Patrick.
And then I got some questions in here we got a lot of great questions. Go ahead, Patrick.
Well, I'll try to keep this brief then. Just a second example that I think this new acronym, SAVE, that we sort of promoted in the article that Rich just went through. And I'll just bring back to a fourth IR. It sort of highlights a new way that they're thinking about place and access and value. There are new social apps, for example, that fashion brands are using, many brands actually now, that you could partner here in China and in the US. You could gather your friends online and actually have a social shopping experience, and the pricing of those items can change depending on the people in your party and how many of them are actually interested in that particular item. There's a slew of brands that are now signing on with these kinds of services, which again is sort of transforming the 4 Ps into the SAVE model, changing the way that there's access, value, education. They're trying to keep you safe, but they're trying to have that kind of social connectedness all at the same time. These are the kinds of innovative pivots that we're seeing, not necessarily changing the business model, but enhancing the kinds of things that we traditionally would have talked about as marketers in just a new way. And I do think that's another way that highlights using a fourth IR kind of a solution to do that.
So I've got a couple of great comments. Baolu says, long live the 4 Ps, Rich. So you got
the evolved 4 Ps.
And I can't resist to share Catherine O'Brien Bailey's comment. She's in New Jersey. So Rich, you can appreciate why well, it's a great comment though. I used to shop multiple times a week at 3 different stores. Now I shop every 2 weeks at Costco. Not my first choice, but they manage crowds better than Wegmans and other stores fall down on home delivery. Getting spots for home delivery became impossible. At Costco, you buy what they have. The biggest change for me is in produce, fish, and meat. What I have found is that local farms have become amazing at online ordering and contactless pickup. Get boost for local producers. Same for meat and fish, sourced locally and delivered same day in the state. I would not have sought them out before, but will continue to use them. COVID-19 definitely created new business opportunities for small business. I want to go to David Young's question. How did I lose it? I'm going to get it over here. Maybe I got answered here. There we go. Brand experience has increasingly become more important than traditional advertising in defining a brand and connectivity, connecting emotionally with customers. What predictions, forecasts do you have regarding how brands can still create brand experience while social distancing is in place, and eventually with the likely reluctance to physically engage even when restrictions are lifted? And Jonathan asks a similar question. Can you start to prognosticate a little bit as the economy opens up again, and what happens in terms of these things you're starting to see in terms of brand loyalty and customer switching and so forth? Patrick, why don't we go to you first?
Well, you mentioned the notion of cognitive miser and I call it psychological inertia. We just want to do what's routine, feels good. I think this is such a powerful driver of human behavior that what we're seeing now is disrupted behavior, and I'm not certain what the timeline is, but it will get back to a new normal. Now, whether that means in New Jersey, I'm no longer shopping at Wegmans and now Costco is my go-to place, that's an opportunity to Costco that patron, that guest, does not have a chance to go somewhere else. So when you have new customers shift over, I think we're going to settle back into our routines. The question is, what is the new landscape going to look like? Boy, if I knew that, I'd,
we might lose Rich.
That's the Rosetta Stone, and everyone is attempting to assess that. What I think I'm really happy about working with a great colleague like Patrick and the other members of our team is that we're trying to keep a finger on the pulse so we can help marketers, help companies understand what might be beyond the horizon or just over the hill, so they can pivot, as Patrick puts, in an agile way to capture these new sets of behaviors, because it will settle into routine once again. The question is, who's going to benefit from that? Will be the smarter ones that create solutions, access, value, and education. That's SAVE framework. Patrick?
Just before you go, Patrick, I'm just going to add one more thing that keeps coming up is this research was on U.S. consumers. Can you and Rich talk a little bit about how you think it travels beyond the United States? We are Thunderbird, of course, and so we want to, we're getting lots of questions about, what about India or Brazil or, wherever it might be, Europe and so forth. So please follow on Rich's point, but also about the kind of global reach of the emerging findings and analysis you've shared.
Okay, that's going to be a great point. Maybe we'll have an opportunity to actually wrap things up on that. But first, just to confirm the New Jersey experience, data out of China, same thing, baskets buying as actually fewer trips and bigger baskets. So what's happening in New Jersey seems to be happening globally, at least right now during the pandemic, just reinforcing that. I think the other point that you had asked on the social piece, or whether it was Jonathan or David, one of the other questions, I gave you some of the examples of some of the new social shopping apps. But I think it is the idea of how can companies capture those kinds of experiences for appropriate segments. I think that the segments are there. I think that they still have needs. It's just that the way they're going to meet getting those needs, and vendors, marketers need to help them satisfy those needs, might be the shift. So clearly people are still going to buy. They will settle into some new routine. I just think it's very interesting, as our friend in New Jersey had shared, maybe that's a new buying pattern. Maybe not for all products that now, but new. And it's interesting question on what's going to happen. So nobody can tell you that. So I guess I'm going to revert to double down on data. This has never been a time more important for all companies, brands of all sizes. You're going to need to really pay attention now in ways that the lemonade stand at the quarter used to work in the old days, location, and now I think that's got to be different. There's a digital divide that's happening even in urban settings, and companies that can close that digital divide of finding ways to connect to customers digitally are probably going to be the ones that emerge in some new normal. On the global,
can I just say, Patrick, I think you got the title of a next piece, Double Down, and I'm just going to add a few more Ds, Dynamically Disaggregated Data.
Yeah.
And that'll get you another HBR or Sloan management. Yeah. Anyway, back to you, Patrick, and then we're going to go back to Rich and wrap up.
Hey, Rich, I think we got a new co-author right here. I was just going to say on the global research, I want Rich to highlight this, but we're in the process right now of exploring those very trends because we understand it was things were moving very fast. This was somewhat opportunistic, and to get an initial baseline in the US, which we all obviously know does not necessarily represent everyone around the globe. And this is exactly the questions that we're actually asking right now, Rich.
Yeah, well, if we understand what's happening globally, we wanted to get a feel for what's going on in our own backyard. So yes, the data we've collected thus far is US based, but we are now in the process of getting ready to field and generate data in China, in Japan, in the UK, in Germany, in Italy, in Australia, and Brazil. Now, the interesting thing about all of these is that the unfolding of the pandemic is timed differently in each of those places, and the reopening of the economies and how well they've managed the pandemic is different in these places. So we're going to try to go ahead and find a common set of measures that we can use that are stemmed from our US-based studies that will apply across all of those, so we can begin to get a feel keep a finger on the pulse as to what's happening around the world in other markets when it comes to how customers behave and how they spend their money.
So Rich and Pat, we're gonna give some last comments here. The team you put, we didn't get a chance to talk a lot about it, but the team you put together, as you called it, very rapid response team, seems like it really jumped right into the fray. And it seems that in fact, this is what research is gonna be like for the future. There's questions about not only, the switching because of, experimentation and, force switching, but also, new values, environmental values, social values, and so forth. So, take any, there's lots of great questions. It's obvious we need another one of these with the two of you, and hopefully, in fact, some of our alums that are leading managers of on the marketing side to get their firsthand perspective, let's say in a month's time or something. Final thoughts, really, Rich, first to you and then to Patrick.
Well, I'll say this is, we are just right now, we're not even at a midpoint. This is not the end of the beginning. It's not the beginning of the, as Winston Churchill once said, we got a long road to go to figure out what's going to be the new normal. We collected data in March. And this is sort of the focus today with a little bit of discussion of the data that we haven't included in that original MIT Sloan article. But many of the questions that we got today are exactly the things that we want to know, and they're exactly the things that managers want to know. That's great to know what went on in March and April, but it's now May and June. What's going to happen? So we are keeping a finger on the pulse as best we can to continue to map what's coming forward, because we all want to know what's ahead. Patrick?
Right, thank you so much, Rich. Patrick?
I guess I would just say that this is still unfolding in real time, and we are still in uncharted territory. That's what makes us exciting, and it's this research team and our institution of Thunderbird and the global citizens that we all are. This is the time that we need to band together. So if you have interest in this, I know Rich and I would be continuing to be interested to talk with you, and maybe even an opportunity to collaborate so we can expedite putting our finger on the pulse on what's happening globally. It's an unprecedented opportunity, and we're very thankful to have this chance to gather the insights and share what we know.
Well, there's incredible energy on this topic and many others as we've been exploring in these Globinars. And I think, Rich, Patrick, you have a lot of willing partners. I don't know, I imagined a new Globe study, but on marketing and consumer behavior and brand loyalty, a la, Professor Javidan's Globe study on trust and cross-cultural leadership that's emerging at the same time. So I'm very excited about that. Just for all of our participants, please, connect with Rich and Patrick. This is particularly our incredible alums. We want you to engage to help shape this thought leadership, this research in a very practical oriented way, which I always appreciate about Rich and Patrick's work. We have a bunch of great new executive education offerings, digital offerings on all of this, really embracing the unknown unknowns and what's emerging in terms of the new reality you see on the screen, from global leadership and management essentials to finance. We got to get marketing up there, Rich and Patrick, as soon as possible with all this great new research. Most importantly, there were great questions here. You know, keep engaging with us. Stay safe and healthy. Know that you're part of this great Thunderbird global family, as Patrick rightfully said. And we not only take care of one another, but we help make sure that our businesses, our organizations, and our communities not only survive, but thrive these complicated times. Thank you again, Rich and Patrick. Amazing. I'm all fired up for the rest of the day.
That's
All the
fantastic.
best. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
And thanks to the team that put this together. Carlene, Sylvia, Mike, Grasso, everyone. Olivia. Thank you all. Bye now.
Very much. Thanks.